What we wanted to talk about, folks, is really in terms of looking at the ecosystem today, right? All of you've observed the investment ecosystem, been investors over a long period of time. And the one time I will go around to all four of you, and after that I don't promise that, is to give us a little bit and just some crisp opening thoughts perhaps, but really focus on what you're seeing today as the next wave of, or I call it sort of startup 3.0 in India. So that's what my context is. And maybe, Sandeep, since you're closest, let me start with you. As you look at the investment ecosystem today, how are you seeing things, and what do you see as different? Maybe one or two points there.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I think having been around a long time, I've now realized I'm old because everything is cyclical. So when you turn around and say, now people are worried about profits, now people are worried about this, this will pass. People will think about growth again, and people will think about other things again. So I think that it's hard to say categorically that the world has shifted in one direction or not. I can tell you from a personal perspective, as we look forward on investments and look at ideas, two categories or two themes that we are trying to incorporate within the businesses that we look for. One centers around environment and the environmental impact that companies are having, ideally positive. And the second is social and the kind of impacts that they have around the issues of either education, healthcare, let's say financial literacy, any of these. So we're trying to see how those elements mix into what consumption opportunities exist going forward. And underlying all of that is a belief that none of these, India is not the US and India is not China. So therefore, the unique aspects of India need to shine through in the businesses that we're looking for. And people have to have a view that's defined by what is different here versus necessarily why the model worked elsewhere. So
the India story and environment, social, some key themes emerging there. And Anjali, let me move to you very quickly. A freshly minted entrepreneur yourself in many ways. You're an entrepreneur in the funding space, in the investment space. So first of all, best wishes in your journey. And again, so as you're now starting to really look at some opportunities and make your first set of investments, how's it looking?
Actually, my first investment was Make My Trip.
Oh, wow. That's why you smiled when I said MMT.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Way back, I think, in 2001. But I think the Indian entrepreneurial or the venture ecosystem is roughly about 2 decades old. Started with the 1999 wave. And I think we are now seeing version maybe 3.0, maybe 3.50. What I'm starting to see change, and a very welcome one at that, is a focus not just on starting up, but building large-scaled enterprises. Because that's really should be the goal. Not merely valuation and unicorns and so on and so forth, which I know is a very attractive word. But what does a unicorn do? It's a mythical creature. I think you're only really meaningful as an enterprise. And if you are solving a large problem, serving a big consumer need, innovating on technology, and creating value for everybody. So we are starting to see companies emerge that are saying we will change how business is done, we will change how people work, how people live. And that's actually very exciting because it goes beyond just financial.
I'll give you a little anecdote, guys. So my father's a practicing chartered accountant now for 5 decades. And one day he sat me down and he said, tell me about these unicorns. And I knew I was going to walk straight into a trap over there. So I said, let's not. Because unicorns will come and go. But as you rightly point out, both of you folks, sustainable businesses and good old-fashioned disciplined businesses will probably sustain for longer. And Sanjay, on that note, you yourself are a newly minted entrepreneur as well. Again, I think this is the second or third startup of your own. Of course, you've supported so many, right? So best of luck to you as well.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about 100x.vc and how I know you've got a whole bunch of innovations in your model, and I'm sure some of the folks are very keen to hear what those are.
Sure. Thanks, JAIDEEP, for inviting. At 100x.vc, just before I open up that part, just as a background, 10 years of individual investing as a private investor, did over 130 odd companies individually. So saw across a variety of businesses at various stages. One, understood India is extremely starved of capital at the seed stage, early stage. Secondly, there was not enough lead investors who were curating deals. It is tough to work in the angel space without incentives. So the structures were not aligned right. And lastly, the closure or the documentation the shareholding agreements, and money to the entrepreneur was taking 3 to 4 months. So didn't work out well in all these three aspects. So at 100x, personally wanted to do volume-based investing. So in a VC world, it is all about how do I invest large chunk of money in smaller number of companies. So we flipped the model. We'll say that we'll invest small chunk of money in large volume of companies. So we will, our focus is that we'll reach to 100 companies every year, investing into 100 startups at seed stage, anywhere between 25 lakhs to a crore. So that's how we are looking at. And then we came out with a safe note. Safe note has been existing in globally over a decade, but nobody in India brought or did that documentation, because the mindset at the level is saying that it comes from the government side, saying that everybody is rogue. You have to prove yourself.
Trust no one. Huh?
Trust no one. So we flipped that model. We believe that all founders are good. In my investing, I've not found a rogue entrepreneur. Ideas fail. In fact, I've backed the same founder again. But so idea is to create a safe note, which is simple agreement for future equity. We converted into an Indian version, Indian law called India Simple Agreement for Future Equity. 6-page document. No rights, no board seats, no voting rights. I mean, just says that in future you will give equity for the investment done. And we run in a class mode. So it's a very different model. We want to become a feeder to the complete VC ecosystem, be it angel networks, be it family offices, VCs. So we will be the first check writer into the system.
Okay. Very, very interesting. And best of luck with some of those innovations. And, they say always save the best for last, right? Great to have you with us. And again, congratulations to all the great successes that Sequoia has had, and really been a huge propeller for the startup ecosystem, both in terms of number of deals, but also in terms of some of the scale of investments you're doing now. And I noticed that as something which has changed over time with you folks. Maybe you could shed some light on that here.
Sure. First, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, JAIDEEP and Snigdha. I would say the single biggest thing, and I've been doing this for about 14 years, the single biggest thing that perhaps I'm seeing a change of is just the sheer quality of the teams that are starting up. To give you a sense, look at the Udaan team, which has come out of Flipkart. Look at, Jitain, who did Citrus and PayU and now started up again. You look at Sachin, who was at Make My Trip as an early guy, who's partnered with a Chinese co-founder who was at Kuaishou to come do social commerce in India. Just the sheer quality of these teams that are now starting up, it's just scaled the game up. And, we as investors need to sort of move up as well to keep up with some of these high-quality teams. So by far, I would say, out of the maybe 18 new Series A investments that we did last year, there must be at least half of them that are repeat founders or very close to the CXOs and some very large teams. Amit Lakhotia at Park Plus, Kunal, of course, from Cred, and so on and so forth. So that's one recurring theme where founders are coming back. They've paid their dues at founder school, and they're coming back just newly energized to make use of the opportunity. The second thing I would say is many industries are getting reimagined. So at a generic level, when people used to ask us, what are you investing behind 5-6 years back, we used to say technology companies, think e-commerce and payments and so on and so forth. But last year, I think a large percentage of dollars went into fintech, for example, which basically means how can technology completely disrupt the billions and trillions of dollars of market cap of incumbents in these well-established, boring, old, regulated industries. Think banking, think insurance, think healthcare. There's a large amount of dollars going in to reimagine how existing industries are working. So these are the two themes I would point out.
How interesting. Let me open up chapter 2 for you guys, okay? So the second chapter really is about not just the new wave of startups, but actually what I think is the new philosophy of doing business, okay? And the new philosophy of doing business, which we are seeing play out in the press, play out in the investment community, in large businesses, and it's not necessarily very new, but it's become very prominent now, is this whole notion of good business. Environmentally positive business, socially positive business. Earlier, there used to be this conversation that there is a trade-off between, being an environmentally positive company and making profits, right? I think now the question is, how do you do both? And there used to be a thing of, is it a company doing social goodness, then how they're going to make money? And that's kind of started to evaporate as well. So I just wanted to maybe get a sense, and maybe start with you on this one, Anjali, right? This concept of good business, how important is it in the decision-making process when you're looking at investing here?
So for us at Avaana, and Avaana is the name of the new platform that me and some of my colleagues are actually putting together. The concept of Avaana actually started because we already have a number of investments. So we are in companies like Delivery and Urban Clap and Darwinbox and Nykaa, all of whom have been very path-breaking and successful. But the consistent theme across all of them is not just, of course, they're terrific founders, they've built great businesses, very innovative, using technology in a smart way, but they're also very responsible businesses. So we built Avaana, and we are continuing to build Avaana as a responsible investor, which means we will get tremendous returns, so great financial returns, but also looking at how do you build businesses in a responsible way, which means not damaging the environment. Obviously, that is table stakes. But beyond that, getting to socio-economic outcomes. What does this mean? Urban Clap today employs about 25,000 people. They don't employ them on roles, but they're professionals. They give them dignity of labor, creating a massive sort of formalization in that segment, which is otherwise informal. Delivery has 60,000 people on its sort of general ecosystem roles. All of them, again, getting formalized, long tail. LoanTap is 30% female borrowers in its book, many of them first-time female borrowers. I've been involved with microfinance now for the last 20 years. Today, microfinance is mainstream, but remember, it started with enabling poor women to further their livelihood and raise their incomes. So the transformative potential, and hence the impact potential of businesses, is huge. I'm very closely associated with the Tata Group, and I think companies like Tata and Unilever show that you can do business in a very responsible way and yet create very successful commercial outcomes. So that's what we are doing at Avaana across equity, debt, and capacity building for commercial companies, responsibly investing in responsible businesses that solve problems.
Wow, that's a tongue twister and a half here. Sandeep, you know, when you and I last chatted, you said what I think is a very profound thing. You said today the biggest threat to consumption is environmental degradation. Elaborate on that, please. What did you mean by that? And how is that really playing a role in your investment philosophy here?
So, look, first of all, on the environmental side, let's just look at the reality of where we are. We're at 410 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. We add 2 parts per million every year. At 600 parts per million, the Earth is toast. We're gone. And it's not going to happen at 600. It's going to be gradual. So as we're going from here to there, we're going to continuously see this erosion take place. And it's playing out. If you go back and you look at an aerial view of Chennai from the last 30 years, you can see lakes have literally disappeared. And as we get more and more urbanization happening, you're going to find more and more issues like water scarcity becoming a reality. So now, if consumers can't get water, they're not going to buy jewelry. They're not going to buy cars. They're not going to buy T-shirts. So if I look overall and I say we're investing in businesses where we believe that what they're doing is not negatively impacting the environment, and ideally is having a reverse effect on it. I think last week Microsoft announced something to the effect that they're going beyond carbon neutral to carbon positive.
Carbon positive, that's right.
And I think that this is a reality, because even I have 2 kids. They're the first to jump on my back about, why are you leaving this on, or why are we taking this, or why are we doing that. I think that the reality is the next generation of consumers are much more aware of this, are going to look for brands that are aligned with the future of the world that they want to see going forward, and therefore it will just make better business sense. You take a company, I was talking to Mohit earlier about this, you take a company like Burberry. Burberry lit on fire, burnt $300 million of inventory last year because they didn't want it sold in a second-hand market. H&M, in a fast fashion business with 52 micro-seasons, holds $4 billion of inventory against $5 billion of revenue. Now, forget if you believe climate change is happening or not, or forget if you care about the environment or not. These are both pretty bad business practices in general. And so if you can think about models that work against it and that allow you to operate with negative working capital, no inventory, I think it becomes aligned both with the objective of making the earth a better place and generally building a business that works. I'll just end with one little thing. This saying we came across, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. And I think that we've kind of pursued irrational growth in this manner, and I think it's having the same effect. And so I think it's time to reassess the way businesses kind of go about it.
Sure. So profits with purpose. What, you want to maybe add some thoughts to that? Since
Yeah, sure. One of my earliest investments ever was in Ujjivan, which was a microfinance company when we intersected with very early as well. And clearly Shamit, who is the founder there, sort of taught me, because I was new to this world of investing, that as you sort of went about this fantastic mission about trying to alleviate poverty, by giving microloans to these groups of 5 women, you went to these villages and you found many women who didn't have businesses and therefore were not eligible for even a microfinance loan. And on the back of Ujjivan's success, and when it became public, we created Parinam, which is an NGO, a sister organization in many ways. And it was a give back, it was a CSR, it was what employees at Ujjivan sort of really embraced and felt better being part of Ujjivan. But when the big microfinance crisis came, the fact that we had Parinam, the fact that we had actually built toilets, we had built sewage removal, we had built schools in these rural communities, it actually made sure that Ujjivan was the first microfinance company that got paid in many of these situations. So that was a direct benefit, which was never really entailed to have been set up for that purpose, but a direct benefit of doing the right thing.
So it's a circular economy in a different way.
Totally is.
In a virtuous cycle being created.
And, we see this, and again, I was chatting earlier, but we could all step out of our VC and startup worlds and try and give back. But I think the ability to give back, the leverage we have and where we sit is way more than a non-profit in many ways. Robin Hood Army came out of Zomato. The simple idea of all the restaurants that are serving food, let's just make sure the excess gets, to the folks who don't have dinner that night. I mean, simple things like that, because the technology that Zomato has is made available now through Feed India, which is now part of their entity. And there are numerous examples across all the startups.
Absolutely. No, and it's long may it continue. All power to that sector. I think, across job creation, environmentally positive companies, socially positive companies, and obviously
JAIDEEP, all of us know, unless we get an exit, we are all donors.
Absolutely. No, and I don't push back at all. I think ultimately at the foundational level, any idea that we look at from an investment perspective has to have the ability to give back, to the investors. So point well taken. And I think as we go, sorry.
I'll just say, so there's a great story, Let My People Go Surfing. It's a Patagonia founder's story. And they opted to operate under the philosophy of leave the world a better place. And with that, they found that actually, in general, their business metrics have performed better in downturns against other people's, because you develop a certain core consumer value that retains customers much better. And look, this is especially important in consumer businesses, where instead of running around trying to keep reacquiring or acquiring new customers, if you can hold them based on a set of values that you believe in, they've proven out that it works very well.
No, absolutely. And there are
I'm
brands.
going to add a piece to that. I actually think profit is very good. It's not just good, it's really very good, because it allows you to reinvest in the business. It allows you to invest in things that are not sort of core to the business but are CSV. Today it's not about CSR, it's not about responsibility, but it's actually about value. And to that extent, I think India is a very forward-looking, very progressive country. We have a 2% CSR law, which we can all debate whether it is well implemented or not. But the reality is, the more your profit, the more you can actually spend on social good. So building profit first, I actually agree, is primary. It generates returns of all sorts to investors and to society.
Absolutely, and point well taken. But there's something which I want to bring to the table very quickly. We've only got a few minutes left. One of the things I see founders wrinkling their nose at all the time is paperwork, right? Founders, by and large, don't like paperwork. And when that paperwork is about compliance, governance, board meeting minutes, then you can already see some people smiling here, okay? But I do want to get them to see the world through your lens as investors, and the importance of, we've gone through the E and S, but the G part of ESG, right? And Anjali, why don't you have a go at this first, right? As our lady rep.
So what is one of my soapboxes? Okay.
So no, seriously, I think the investment community takes compliance and governance much more seriously than the founder community, and I think it's one of those bridges which is crying out to be built. So I just want to take the last sort of 4 minutes that we have very quickly to get a few of you guys to put your voices down on this here. And let's go. Yeah.
I'll be brief. So governance is a very, very big topic. It can bring to mind things of big boards and big board meetings and big names and all of that. Actually, at the heart of it, it is simple things like being compliant with the law and doing the right things. Investors ourselves are held to very high standards of governance by our LPs and investors. So we have a fiduciary and we are regulated entities, particularly in India, SEBI regulates us. So for our companies, the one thing I will like to leave startup founders with is the law of the land does not distinguish between big companies and small companies. So if you are in violation on basic compliance stuff, which you think, it could be shops and establishment, it could be gratuity and pension and so on and so forth, you are still liable. So please be thoughtful about that. A little bit of investment in a good compliance governance culture goes a long way in fundraising, in your growth, and avoiding potentially fatal unintended errors.
Sure. While we don't have LP kind of governance, it's our proprietary capital, but idea is for us, we have an underlying statement saying that there is no innovation in legal and finance. So absolutely no innovation. There's nothing that we would like to hear across or work with founders, any innovation in that space.
Sure. That's a great way of putting it here. Did you want to say something? Somebody? Okay. So Mohit, let me just pick up from this and maybe just the last couple of bullet points. When there is good governance, when there is therefore a good relationship going between founders and investors and so on, one of the things which has been my observation is that, inevitably startups go through cycles where they hit air pockets, and folks like all four of you actually and many of your peers have seen that happen 100 times before. And you're able to supply the parachutes or you're able to help them steady the ship and prevent it from going into a nosedive, right? How important is that relationship? Is it overly important? I'll leave it to you. Yeah.
You said air pockets, so I'm going to use an analogy of the pilot of the plane and the air traffic controller, which in many ways I think symbolizes this joint ownership responsibility to land that plane safely. But the roles are very different. It is finally the pilot's decision to land that plane or not, bases how he's feeling, whether he feels the runway is clear or not, but it is completely the air traffic control's role to make sure that he's lined up in clear skies and not in busy trafficked areas, and give him the weather patterns and all the learnings of the pilots who landed before and so on and so forth. But I think if there's a clear understanding of what your role is, my role is, but there's a joint objective of sort of landing it, then I think the trust gets built. I think the issue starts when you start getting into each other's zones. If an investor gets too prescriptive, he should really be on the founder side, and vice versa. If everybody wants to do it their way without really worrying about what's going out in the world, then it sort of alienates a lot of the investor or the shareholder group. So I think this is easier to say than to do. But after the honeymoon period and 2-3 years, if you haven't built trust, and you haven't been vulnerable with each other that you can really open up, then I think you failed in that relationship.
So it's a bit of a high wire act, but a really important one. All right. I must wrap up, guys. Thank you ever so much. Big round of applause for my panelists, please, folks.